screens are quite big at the moment. I was thinking, oh, maybe this is
Hello everyone, my name is Tim Nash. I'm the WordPress platform lead for 34sp.com. We're one of the largest UK hosting companies you've never heard of. I'm here with my colleague Keith and Siobhan over there, and we're currently doing a road trip where we're going around all the WordPress user groups. Normally I give a talk on security, but I came down here about 11 months ago and gave a talk on security, and they haven't got the stains off the chairs yet, so I was insistent that I wasn't allowed to do that talk again. So instead, we're doing a combo talk on WP-CLI and an introduction to using the command line. Now, for a lot of people in the room, are going to go into two camps. One camp is, I'm very familiar and happy to use the command line. Would those people put their hands in the air? Okay. The other group is probably, I have never used the command line in my life, it's scary and horrible. Is there anybody in that group? Okay. The other thing to bear in mind is that for those of you who just put your hands up, it's not scary. It really isn't. It's a fast, efficient way to actually use your computer. We've been using the command line pretty much since we came up with the idea of a keyboard. In fact, we came up with a keyboard well before we came up with a mouse. And hopefully, by the end of this evening, we are going to convince you that actually the WordPress admin area is bloated, horrible, and a place you do not want to be, because you can do things so much better via the command line. The other thing I want you to bear in mind is that it really isn't scary. For those of you who are my age, your first and probably the majority of your life, that when you've been using computers, probably was on the command line. I didn't see a GUI till the mid-90s because I was working with Linux and Unix systems, and Windows was this thing that had a pointy-clicky thing. In fact, I probably didn't see a browser till early noughties. So I'm very familiar with being in the command line. It's my natural home. But I recognize that for some people it's not, so I'm just going to explain something very simple. The yellow thing, afterwards you type this bit with your fingers. It's connected to the keyboard, you type it out. And for every command I'm going to show you, it will start with the word WP. Because tonight we're talking about WP-CLI, or the WordPress command line interface. Why would you use the command line interface? Well, the very first time I used the command line interface was when I was prompted to by this. A white screen of sudden instant death. I went to activate a plugin. As you do, I was in the admin area. I went click to plugins, click activate, and instead of getting the nice, there's going to be a warning, this was about WordPress 3 point something or other, where WP-CLI was just starting up, but they hadn't got the nice catching fatal error point. I got a fatal error, I got a white screen. What do I do? Well, traditionally, and I suspect most people in this room, when they get this, when the plugin's activated, the first thing they do is that they go into their FTP client, they go to the plugin and they rename the plugin. Because then they know that they'll reload it and WordPress will go, oh, I can't find the plugin files, and they'll deactivate the plugin automatically. This isn't a very good thing to do. Apart from anything else, that takes a lot of time. As far as I was concerned, my website was down. I didn't know if it was the admin area. You panic. But also, if you simply rename the plugin, it's actually still in the database, and you're messing up all sorts of things. A much more simpler way to do it was if you have SSH access, and Keith's going to talk to you in the next talk about how to actually log on to your website via SSH for the first time, but using both Windows and Mac and a Linux system. So I'm going to assume that he's going to talk to you about how to do that, and I'm just going to jump straight into WP-CLI commands. How to get rid of a worrying plugin. For example, let's say I had the REST API beta on, was just to type WP plugin deactivate, and then the name of the plugin. Plugin's deactivated. My white screen has disappeared. I now have my website back. That's really quite handy. I've managed to go from, instead of having to go through a rigmarole of connecting up via FTP, going in and renaming a file, and a very hacky way of doing things, I can simply type WP plugin, deactivate the name of the plugin. Boom. problem solved. You start looking and thinking, oh, well, what else can I do with this strange new world I live in? Well, let's say I don't want the REST API anymore. It's a terrible thing. Oh, clearly, it's just broken everything. And I don't want CMB2. Well, I can do WP plugin uninstall and then just specify the name of the plugins, the REST API, the CMB2. And there you go, WP-CLI happily deletes it. I'm sure we could probably guess what the next one might be on this list. If I want to install a plugin from the WordPress repo, all I have to do is type in WP plugin install and give it the name. And boom, hey presto, it installs. If I pass over this -- activate, which then it will activate that plugin automatically for me. Installing WooCommerce now takes seconds. As long as I know the name of its name, I can go and install it. I can actually do WP plugin search and put in a keyword, and it will list all the plugins and let me be able to pick which plugin I want to do. It does get a bit faffy when there are 50,000 plugins in the repo, and you're trying to paginate by many pages. If I want to see the plugins that I've got enabled, WP plugin list. You notice I'm adding these attributes every so often. In this case, I'm saying -- status equals inactive. So I'm saying only show me plugins which are inactive. I could say only show me plugins that are active. Only show me plugins that have an update equals available. I can start that means I can start doing things like, I can see what plugins I need to update. I can see what plugins I'm not using quickly and easily. I can then, if I'm getting really clever, I can automate this so I can go through the route and remove them or do other things with them. So the basic structure is very simple. It's WP. That tells the command line that you want to do something with the WP-CLI. The command, so that's the big overarching theme, and we've already guessed in this case plugin, anything to do with plugins. Theme, to do with theme. User, site, option, there's loads of commands. And then the subcommand is an action, the thing you want it to do. So WP plugin list. And then the filter and the result, or an attribute and the results attached to it. You can have multiple parameters passed afterwards. Here's another really simple example, WP core version. Very useful to know what version I'm on. You can tell that when I fired these up to do these slides, I typed this in and went 4.6. Tells that my Vagrant box isn't up to date. Oh well. WP core update. WordPress is up to date. That doesn't sound right. And you may have actually come across this yourselves. Your websites will quite often tell you, when you log in the first time after a recent update, it's up to date, even though you know it's not. That's because WP actually, so WordPress itself only checks the updates every 12 hours or so. So you can force it with WP-CLI, say WP core check update. Oh, I found some stuff. So what happens if I now run the command? WP core update, boom. My WordPress is up to date. If I actually wanted to do install WordPress, all I'd have to do is WP core download, a copy of my WordPress files are there. WP config, core config, and pass it the parameters, site title and site URL. Now I've got a WP config file. WP core install, I now have a fully working version of WordPress. Take your 5-minute install, then including going to the WordPress.org and uploading your files for FTP, you'd have to go to the bar 5 times while I already be working on my brand new WordPress site. It's a pretty powerful tool to make things go quickly. Even if you're a one-handed typer, you will be able to type out those commands and you can copy and paste them. You don't really need to type them out at all. But one-handed typing, you will still be quicker than going through and doing this with dragging and dropping of the mouse. It's also an awful lot more accessible. If I wanted to update my plugins from previously, and I went and did this in WP Admin, I've seen some horrifying WordPress installs. I've had to try and manage horrifying WordPress installs with hundreds of plugins, with advert after advert after advert that pushes the actual plugin list table somewhere down 3 or 4 pages before I can even find the button that says update. And when I press the button that says update, a bunch of other stuff is interacting with it, so it takes forever. Through WP-CLI, I can get rid of all that. I don't see the mess other plugins make to the admin interface because I can work directly with WordPress. It's not just for plugins bits, you can do lots of interaction with users. So here's a really simple example of WP user list. Also, it highlights one of the interesting things that most people don't realize. You may notice roles is pluralized. Not many people realize that a WordPress user can actually have more than one role. In fact, if you were in the WordPress admin area and you went to users, it clearly says role and only shows you one role. But you can quite happily apply multiple roles. It's only the user interface on the WordPress admin area that is defining it as one role. This means you can be incredibly sneaky. For example, if you were a malicious person, you could set up yourself as a user with subscriber role and then apply yourself an administrator role. And magically, you wouldn't appear in the administrators, but you would appear in the subscribers list. If you're using WP-CLI, it will list actually all the roles that are there. It's a tiny byproduct, but it's one of those little things that up until I started using WP-CLI, I had no idea that you could apply multiple roles. If I'd thought about it, I could have probably worked it out, but I didn't know it was there. One of the things that I'm therefore like to use WP-CLI for is actually as an auditing system. While it is possible to fake the data that I'm being given, you can manipulate the output of this. It is very unlikely someone is going to go to the bother of doing so, and if they do, they don't like me. And they've probably done other things, so I'm probably screwed regardless. So using WP-CLI as your basic audit trail, a golden rule is never trust the admin interface. So you might as well use WP-CLI as a way of knowing that this is the truth, especially for looking for things like user registration, looking at emails, looking at display names. It's also one of the few places you can change the user login without resorting to a plugin or hacking into the database yourselves. Adding users, dead easy. WP user create, username, email, user password. One of the nicest things, I work for a hosting company, and there's this very awkward moment when the client, you can tell that I screwed up, by the way, and I was just about to clear my nice output. Secret password cleared in there. But one of the nice things working for a hosting company, and we occasionally have to go onto people's websites, and they will say things like, shall I create you a login? And we'll be there going, we don't need you to create us a login. And there's that moment where they're going, how do you not need us to create a login? We have the access to the server, so we can just go WP user create, in goes 34SP user. We then can, funnily enough, WP user delete and delete it afterwards. However, running, again, you can add this ability to just add users very quickly and easily. You can script all these. Another use case where I use this all the time is on my own personal website, I don't have an administrator user. It doesn't exist. I only have an editor role that I log into day in, day out. If I need to become an administrator, I used to just up my own personal role, but now what I do is actually create a new user. I just temporarily create a user like that give them the administrator power to go in the admin area and edit things. I then delete that user once I'm finished with it. I haven't got an administrator on my site. Even if you got into my admin area, you couldn't do too much damage in there. Obviously, yeah, it makes it harder. It also is an extra layer for me and a bit of a pain, but it gives me a bit of sense of security. Now, I probably should have demoed this a bit better by showing you a fatal error. One thing you do find is if you do WP user list or WP plugin list, in fact, I told you this was going to have live demos. It's not going to work because it's going to not let me out. Ah, something scary's happened. Still scary happened. Oh wait, that's an actual WordPress error. That's not very helpful at all. That's not going to help. Go back in there. And I'll demo it with something else in a second. The skip plugins, skip themes, plugins and themes themselves can add extra WP-CLI commands in. They also execute crap. So they create warnings and errors and fatal messages, which will stop your admin area working, which will stop things working properly. But with WP-CLI, you can say, don't run any plugins while I'm running this command. Don't run any themes while I'm doing this command. Don't run any of the code that's associated with it. Just run the WordPress core stuff and get me back what I want. The other feature up here, you can see I've got -- fields. Equals ID and user login and roles. So now I'm filtering this saying I don't want that big long list. I only want a limited amount of stuff. So I can start filtering stuff. I can also say, okay, I'm actually looking for a very specific thing. So I could instead put -- user login equals Tim, and that would just return Tim. Or in fact, if you just put Tim on its own and you don't put it in quotation marks, you'd have got Tim and Timmy back in that scenario. I'm not going to go through every single command because there are lots. But don't worry, there's documentation, and it's genuinely easy documentation. Pretty much for WP-CLI, all you have to do is whatever you think you want to do with it, you type in what you think roughly the command might be and the word WP-CLI into Google, and there's almost certainly a command cookbook in place for you. But there are a range of them. There's a shortcut to this, which is just wp-cli.org. This will take, and then click commands, you can get to all these commands. Each one of the command has a bunch of subcommands attached to it. But I want to show you some useful ones that I find useful day in, day out. Then I'm going to do a very quick demo, then hand over to Keith. And then after that, I'll show you some really more interesting advanced stuff that you can do. So a really simple, useful command. How many of you use Velvet Blues or a similar thing to try and replace one set of URLs with another set, or any sort of search and replace? Yeah, some people must have done this. One of the companies up in Liverpool, they've got a tool that does it, and it's gone out of my head. I feel so sorry for people who use things like that. WP search, replace. Oh no, I need to change my name, WordPress to WordPress. Done. Goes through all your tables looking for the replacements. You can specify which tables you want to do. You can do dry runs. Search replaces them. Such a nice, easy command to use. Yes?
What about if it says serialized strings?
It will do serialized strings quite happily. It will go through serialized strings. You can also set it to run this either just doing MySQL, or you can tell it to do it with PHP. If it does it with PHP, it's a bit slower, but it will properly go through all of the strings, reopen them, re-serialize everything on the way through. It is very, very nice. It is so simple to use. It will save you hours. So if you're ever doing a site migration where you need to change from you're moving from example.com to myexample.com, you put example.com in that column, myexample.com in the other column, and you run it. It is brilliant. We must use this every day, 10, 20 times a day. Our migration team must run this command so often, it's not silly. One of the things to bear in mind once you've done that is if you're using the object cache, or indeed even if you don't know if you're using the object cache, WP cache flush your cache. It just makes, it takes all the object caching that's either in your WP options table if you're not using an object cache like Redis or Memcache, and it will flush that. Otherwise, it will flush your Redis or Memcache for you. Such a life-saving tool. Again, one line. Something that if you ever have problems with permalinks, quite often you install a plugin and the links aren't showing up properly, or links you expected to on your custom post type aren't showing because you didn't write in a reflush rule. You just do WP rewrite. Ooh, spot the spelling mistake in my slide. Use the rewrite rule that's above that. WP rewrite rule flush. Rewrite and flush, and it will just rewrite those rules for you. One of my favorites little tools is if I want to export the database, WP-DB export and give it a file name. Now I have my MySQL database exported as an SQL file. Now I can just drag and drop, move that to a different, I can rsync that, or I can just FTP and get that file. I've basically got a backup of my database run in a few seconds. If you want, rather than a MySQL SQL file version. If you just want the WordPress XML that they use for their importing, you can actually, instead of WP-DB, you can just put WP export and the file name, and that will get you a XML file, and then WP import will import it. Whereas if you use WP-DB import file name, you can import a SQL file. It doesn't care what's in that SQL file, I should point out. So do be a bit careful. It is designed to be used with the export, but it will import any SQL file you like into the database. It doesn't need to know about the database credentials, doesn't need to know any of that. You can just import it in. I've seen some very, very dodgy uses of the WP import, DB import, but it's still very useful. WP option get site URL goes into your options table, gets the option called site URL and returns it to you. Handy. I don't know, for the way we have our WordPress set up, our site URL and home URL are slightly different. Our site URLs are in /WP. People tend to forget this, so we end up having to set it quite a lot. WP option set, site URL, and there's me just putting some random stuff in there. Update site URL. You can update any option in your WP options table. You can actually do, you can play around with serializing and unserializing automatically as well with this command. Just be aware that if you put anything in double quotes, it will go in as a string into your WP options table. This means if you've put a spare space at the end, you have just broken your website if you've put that in on the site URL on there. Also, if you do WP option set and you misspell site URL, let's say you drop the E, it will create it as a new option in your options database. It doesn't do any sanitization or validation at all, really. That was the very, very quick intro to try and whet your appetites. What's cool? There's a very handsome gentleman there. What's going to happen now is Keith's going to go and actually talk to you about how you could get to the point where you're going to start doing those commands. And then I'm going to come back with a second part. We're going to have a break, then we're going to go back, I'm going to do a demo, and then we're going to do the advanced section with some really cool bits, I think. It's almost like we rehearsed this earlier, I promise. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Keith.
Right, hello everyone. Hopefully now I'm going to show you what it's like. Oh, sorry.
I'll do my dance.
Spanish flea. Hey. So hopefully I'm going to show you how to move into using a terminal. Some of you will already have it if you've got a Mac or Linux, and some of you with Windows will be able to download it using a program called Putty. Okay, this is me. I'm Keith, and I'm a WordPress and system specialist at 34SP. Not quite a seasoned talker, so excuse the nerves. First of all, with Mac users, if you look on your dock bar, you should find you've got this little guy at the bottom. If you can't find it though, you can use the spotlight search. So that's Command and Spacebar, and that'll bring up this box here. Comes across the top, just type in turn, and then you can find it and just press enter and it'll run. That easy for a Mac user. If you've got Windows though, you're going to need to install a program called Putty. Now, if you just search in Google, which is why I've shown you like this, it literally will be the top result. Just click on that, and you'll see this on the next page, or you need to go to downloads to get to this page. You want to pick the one for your particular version of Windows, whether it's 32-bit or 64-bit Windows. You can usually find that out from your system information, and it should tell you which one you've got. Once you've run and installed the program, what it will do is it will create a little icon like that at the top. It sometimes sticks it on your desktop, but sometimes it can be in your download folder. But if you go into your start menu and just type Putty, it should bring it up. Stick it wherever you want, stick a shortcut on your desktop, whatever. Now, when you first open it up, it will look like this on the left. You can save a whole bunch of features, as you can see here, but I'm not going to go into that. We'll keep it real simple. You just type in the name of the host of your site, so that'll be your website where your FTP or your SSH is going to be, and literally just hit open. That's going to bring you to this next bit. Now, this is going to be a bit of a shared screen. This is on a Mac or on Linux, but you'll get a window pop up and it will say login user on Windows. So you'll put in your user, which is my user in this case. If you're on a Mac or if you're on Linux, you'll type SSH space and then the name of your username at, and then whatever they've told you your host's going to be. First thing it's going to do is ask you, do you accept the authority for this? Just say yes. And then it'll ask you for the password. Type in your password, and then it should drop you to a prompt like that. Now what I'm going to do is show you what some of the stuff you can do, handy little tools that will get you around the command line that aren't necessarily WP-CLI, but will be useful for you to use. First one is this, ls, which stands for list. You can type -ahl. What this basically tells it to do is show you all of it in a human readable format and give me the long result. So it's giving me all the information, what permissions are on my files, who owns my files, and what my files are called. Now, something you may or may not find on your host, depending, is a thing called the manual pages, where you can literally type the word man space and then say ls to get more information on how to use that command. But if you've got Google, just type the word man and then the command you want or how to list. You'll find all of the more in-depth stuff on the internet. It's all there. Now the next thing you'll want to do is change directories. Now depending on how your actual host is set up, it might drop you in the HTTP docs folder or it might drop you just above, depending. So here you can just type cd, change directory, space, and in this case I've gone to WP contents and it's given me this line here. Now some of the hosts are really nice and they'll show you this, which shows you where you are, just so you can remember whereabouts you are in the file system. But if you're not too sure where you are, especially important if you want to delete something or anything like that, just type pwd, which is print working directory, and that'll actually show you where you are at the moment, wherever you are. So in this case, it shows me I'm in the WP content folder, so I'm good to go. Now I haven't really gone into a lot of detail on this command, mainly because although I do copy things around, I use a thing called rsync, which I'll show you in a bit. And it basically copies files. But again, this basic command, copy, cp, give it a space, name of the file, location you want the file to go to. You could do a whole folder using what we call recursive mode, where you'd put a -R for recursive, and it would copy it recursively. Sadly, as you can probably tell, I didn't get enough time to go into a lot more detail on the copy command. But again, something you can look up pretty easily on the internet. I think the emphasis here is everything you want to do, don't be frightened, the information's out there, just search for it. CP man, give you the full man pages, give you all the information you need. The next thing we do a lot in Linux is moving. Now moving is, like it says it is, moving something, but also it's renaming in the same token. So the very first one there, I want to rename my WP config file to old because I want to do a test. So I've typed mv for move, the name of the original file, the name I want to change the file to. On the second line, I've done the same thing, but with a bit of a shortcut. We have a thing called brace expansion, which are these funny little curly things here. And what that basically tells it to do is take the original file, wp-config dot, and then I'm saying the PHP bit, I want to change that, comma, to old, which is my replacement name. And that will literally run the same command as the above, but save you typing it all out. So that's really handy. The next one is just another example of where you might want to take an image and tell it to go into a specific folder. You can just give it the folder name and it will just drop it in there for you. But you can do the same, move one folder to another folder. It'll probably warn you want to move a folder and you just say yes. Something else you're going to come across when you're working on your site, and you probably have already, maybe in a control panel, cpanel, whatever, problems with your permissions on your files. Now, what we use is chmod, which is change modifications on the file. 644 is the standard permission we tend to use for files, and 755 we tend to use for directories. The top one, I'm obviously just telling it I want to change the permission to 644 on my file.php. Second one is an example of a folder. I want to set it to 755. Again, just the name of your folder. The chown is change owner. So you've got your permissions, which is can you read, can you write, can you execute on a file. This is who owns the file and who's in the group for the file. So here I'm saying I want to change the owner of the file. So let's just say you've migrated a WordPress site from somewhere else. Chances are the file might be some other user and you'll get a number like 501 or something. No problem, just put in the user that is your FTP username, name of your file, and just run it off and it'll be fine. Bottom group is doing both. So I might want to set the user dot and the group. So I can do it in one command, user, group, name of my file. At the bottom here, I've just tried to explain a little bit about what this means. So basically, you've got the letters R for read, W for write, and there's X for execute. Now, for files that you usually use in WordPress or PHP files, the user, which is the very first column, has read and write usually. Then the middle one, which is the group, has read, which means anyone in the group can read it, but they can't write to it. And then the final one is other, so any other user on the system can read this file. With the folders, slightly different. First, you'll notice there's a D at the start, which lets you know it's a directory. Then you've got read, write, and execute. Then you've got read and execute, because the system needs to be able to, they use the execute to allow it to see inside the folder to see what's in there. It's done in binary. I'll try not to go too heavy on that, but just to show you what it actually means number-wise, at the bottom there, you'll see it's 421, 421, 421, and you just add the numbers together. So obviously, if it's a 4, it would just be read. If it was 4 and 1, which is 5, then it would be read and execute. And if it was 4 and 2, 4, 5, 6, it would be the read and the write. And that's literally what that means. You can shortcut it by just putting plus X for execute, plus U for user and stuff like that, again in the man pages, but I've kept it the way that most guides will tell you, which is to do it with the numbers. So as easy as that. How do you view files on the terminal? A few ways. First one's to use cat, which it'll just show you on the screen. So I say cat my file, and if it's a massive file, it's just going to fly off the screen to the top. Not ideal if I want to look up and down it and search it. If I use less, that's an editor. Doesn't let me edit immediately, but it's like we call it an editor. It's like a buffer. It allows you to read it and move up and down it, like a screen reader, and then you can search within it. It works very much like VI, if you've ever heard or used VI. It has a hidden feature actually as well. You can use less, which is safe because you say less the file name. It's editing the file but not writing to it. So if you accidentally hit a key, you're not going to damage the file. But let's say you do want to edit it, you can actually press the letter V in it and it will switch to VI. You can then edit it, hit escape, and it will switch back into the safe reader again, and then you can quit out, which just saves a step of closing it, opening the editor called VI, and then doing it that way. VI, as I've mentioned, is an editor, so it opens the file up. If you needed to fix a syntax error, maybe there's a semicolon missing somewhere, you've looked at your error log, it said it's on this line, you can type VI, another little hint that I didn't put on here, space and a plus sign, the line number, the name of the file, and if that's an error that you've got on line whatever, takes you straight to the line. You can see it then, oh, I've forgotten to put the semicolon. Bang the semicolon in, save it, come out, you're done. And finally, Nano. Nano's a bit more user-friendly for the beginner because it gives you a few screen options, like it'll tell you how the key for save and key for edit and find. Not as, the VI is there is no help unless you press the H for help button. So maybe Nano is probably popular with some people because it's just easier to use at first. Till you get confident, then with VI you can move around and do shortcut keys, and it's really easy to use once you've got used to it. You know what I mean? So now I mentioned rsync earlier on. This is quite a cool tool because it's remote sync, but it also copies things, and it copies things in a really easy way. Because with copy, and the reason I didn't go into it with copy is, although copy will be on everything you use, it gets funny about hidden files sometimes, and if you don't do the syntax correctly and use special braces and things, you can end up copying stuff and all your hidden files are gone. That's a bit of a pain, I'll be honest. So with this, you just tell it, I want to transfer, if you like, or copy the AVZ. I'm telling it I want an archive, so I want everything recursively inside, everything, not just that folder, but everything in it as well. The V tells me to do it verbosely, so it shows me what it's doing, so I can keep an eye on it. And then the Z is to zip it. And the reason for using the zip is some hosts don't like it if you try to transfer a lot of files really fast, and then they block you for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or whatever. So you use the Z to zip it. It'll take it a little longer to do it, but it won't hit any throttle limits on your hosting. So that's really handy. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm saying I want to send a copy of WP content, and I want to stick it on my site. So my FTP username at the name of my site, and this you put there to separate the domain with the actual thing that I want to send. This is my target. The forward slash means go into my home. So if your home's public HTML or HTTP docs, that would just drop it straight in there. So in this case, because that's where I'd normally get when I log in, it just drops it straight in there for me. If, however, yours isn't like that and you need to make sure you tell it where to go, same again, but this time give it the full path. So, which you can usually find out in your control panel. And you can just literally say, that's where I want you to send it. It will send it. Now, another tip here. At the moment, I'm just doing WP content as it stands. That moves the whole folder. But there is a situation sometimes where you might be wanting to take the contents of a folder and transfer it into a different folder. So let's pretend I'm on a development machine doing a site for somebody, and I've got a folder that's not for some reason called WP content, where you've set everything up. You'd put the name of that folder with a forward slash, and then this down here would become, you'd type WP content forward slash, and it would just transfer the contents of that first file you mentioned into the other folder. So that's also a little bit of a shortcut, which I find pretty handy. Find. Now I love this tool because if you're on Linux or on anything that's not graphical, sometimes you don't know where stuff is, especially if you've just took on a new site and you don't know the layout or anything like that. This thing will find files and let you do things to the files. The first one, I've said, okay, I want to find in the folder WP Contents Themes a type F, which is a file, not a directory, specifically a file, with the name to case sensitivity, my.css, and it will tell me where it is. If I used iname, it would be case insensitive, so it doesn't matter if you don't know how it's spelled. The second one, I'm saying find in this folder and any folder below this folder a type file with the name with config in it. So some of you may have used wildcards, I'm guessing, at some point. But the idea of wildcards is the stars is that it'll look for whatever at the start, the word config, and whatever at the end of it. Notice the backslashes. These are important because most hosts will use a thing called bash shell, and bash does actually treat special characters differently. So that actually is what we call an escape. So we're saying, and some PHP coders here will have used escapes, I'm assuming. So it's the same principle as escaping in anything. Please treat this as just a star, not something else. Config, treat it as a star again. Next one, slightly different, but showing you how we can find something and do something to it. And these two you might find yourself using, especially if a site's gone a bit awry, or you've been hacked, or you're trying to clean up, or something's come from one host to another and the permissions are slightly different with the host. Find in this folder and anything below it the type file, and then I want to execute the command chmod 644 on anything you return back to me. So that's going to go through every single file across WordPress and set it to 644 for me. Cool. Same again, this time type directory. Set it to 755. Goes through, changes them all for you. Now, something I didn't show on the slide before that is, and this is another one that's relevant to migrating sites. Like I just said, the permissions can be different when you bring them across. If the users have checked, if you've, how do I put this? If you've used a host where Apache is the owner, has anyone had one where you've seen Apache as or www as your owner? Some hosts run like that, but you might move to another host and they don't do that. They do it to your FTP user. And then of course, your user phones you up and says, I can't upload anything to my site. My media doesn't work. No problem. You could just jump in here, use that change ownership command, chown, space, minus capital R for recursive, your user, dot your group, or just your user, WP content. It'll plow through for you in one command. Everything's the right permission, uploads works. Happy days. So that's one I missed off. This is a search for things in the files. Rather than finding the files, we're going to look in them. So I'm going to look for my function. Now I know my function exists somewhere. I don't know, it might not be my function. Based on this and debugging stuff, I might have an error in the error log that says this function's unhappy about something. Where is it? I didn't write the plugin. I don't know. So I do grep the function I'm looking for. Is it in functions PHP? Now I might be looking there because I think that's where they might put it. If it's in there, it will return it back to me, show me what line it's on. If I don't know which file it's in, I can use the minus R for recursive, that's look through everything, for my function, dot in this folder. So it'll take recursive, so that's this folder and anything below it. Next one, looking for my function again, but this time specifically in a folder. So have a look through the plugins folder. I think it's in a plugin somewhere. So I'm saying go recursively inside that specific folder, WP content plugins, and try and find something called my function inside one of the files in there. It will return back all the files that have got that word in it. Now, if I don't really know if the function's got capitalization in it or not, so it might be my with a capital M, lowercase y, it wouldn't find it because Linux is all case sensitive. So, no problem. -I means case insensitive, I don't really care about the case. R recursive, the function I'm looking for, in the folder that I want to look in. And finally, one which I'm sure some people may have already done, or if they haven't, you probably will do now you know it's there. I need to know what the database details are, quick and easily, without me having to actually go in the file and scroll down and find them. Show me anything with capital DB in it, and WP-config will just give me the login details, which I can then go and do whatever I need to do with them. And of course, the table prefix, I've just migrated a site from a new customer and it's not working. Is the prefix different? Check the prefix. As you can see, that's based on what they would come back with. Whatever line has it on, it will return the line and show you. And it will also tell you, if it's in multiple files, it will tell you the file name. So you can see which file has it in, so you can go through them all checking for whatever it is that you want. Now, removing files. Obviously, we like to delete things sometimes, and we always err caution when removing things. Now, the great thing about the command line, as Tim mentioned, and WP-CLI is it's really powerful. Yes, so powerful, it trusts you in every way whatsoever. This is the dark side, remember, you've got the power. You do what you want and it'll do it. It won't question you, won't ask you necessarily. Now, I'm using RF, which means that I want to force the removal. Some hosts might not necessarily have told you, but the simple RM might force anyway. So it's really careful just to make sure that you're sure that you really want to remove this. So I'm saying, please remove my file. It'll go, gone. No coming back, can't get it back. If I do rm -rf the folder will get deleted and everything inside of it, gone. This last one, I'm going to tell you about it, just to make sure in case you ever stumble across it on Google, you don't try to run it without thinking about it. Let's just pretend that you CD'd, you SSH, as I showed you earlier, into your site, and you've got a couple of sites in there, and you've just accidentally forgotten that the bloke just called you, and you went into the other guy's site, and something else happened, and someone in the office talked to you about something, and then you've come back and you're going to carry on removing the thing you were going to remove. You've forgotten that you moved around, and then you ran that to remove everything everywhere within this folder and everything below it. That site's gone. If you were to do it somewhere on your own VPS, or somewhere where you could go higher up than just your website, I'm afraid that's going to happen, because it's just going to delete everything until it can't find anything else to delete, and it's not good times. Finally, now I'm going to tell you about this one. Not all hosts will let you do it. Use it with caution. It's not like they're going to ban you or anything, but it might not be relevant information is what I'm trying to say. You can run PHP -v to get the version of PHP. That probably will be relevant to a point. If your host has a thing called FastCGI, and they provide you with mod PHP, which is the Apache built-in version, assuming you've got Apache or Nginx's built-in module for it, it might not be the version that you get when you run this, because servers can have one version installed on them, and then the version your site's using could be a completely different version. I would recommend using the PHP Info function, if you've never done it before, on your actual site, within your actual site, to figure that one out. That has kind of drifted off from here, but it's just a good point that if you ran that and it said you had version 5.6, but you know full well that your site's misbehaving and it shouldn't in 5.6, create a PHP Info file in HTTP docs or wherever your root is. Check it and then please remove it afterwards. Because a lot of people leave them there and then somebody naughty comes along, finds it. Oh, they're running PHP this version, exploit. Oh, there we go, and they exploit you. That's one for you to make a note of. Exploits, you see, security exploits. So make sure you don't leave anything around that they can see or find to tell them about your site. The -m will show you modules. Again, if it's using mod PHP, handy if you want to know if a module's installed or not. The PHP Info function I mentioned does actually show you everything. So it will show you what modules are installed as well. If you're not sure, something says it needs a module, just search the page, scroll through, you'll find it. What version of MySQL am I running? Capital V. It's a bit weird, MySQL, but you have to use a capital V, otherwise you'll just get an error message. And that will show you what version it's actually running. MySQL's a bit misleading. It has two sets of numbers. I'm trying to think what they are now, but you get one number and then you get the revision number. It's the second one usually, so it'll be 5.5, 5.6. The first number will be 14 or something, and you'll probably think that doesn't sound about right. But yeah, you want the second number. If you're running Apache on the server, -v there will get it to show you what version of Apache you've got. If you're running Nginx, which is the more popular choice, not that I'm biased, but it is, it's faster for one, and not bloated. Then you can use -v, which will tell you what version of Nginx you're using. And that's really it. It was only a short one, just to give you a little bit of a taste of what it's all about and get you in there so you control these wonderful WPCLI commands. Hope that was all right. You enjoyed it. Any questions you can always ask later on. That's fine. Thank you very much.
All right. On the grounds that we will have some doubters who are still going, I see no relevance to me. Is there anybody in the room who we have not converted to at least the idea that this is a fast way to use WordPress? Oh. I reckon someone's lying, but it's okay. We're going to have a short break, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to do a couple of live demos for you, and then we're going to look at some of the, I say more advanced, but it's not advanced and it gets no more complicated than typing the word WP and then several commands afterwards. But it's more interesting stuff you can do and things that you can do with WP-CLI that you can't do with the admin. We've still got people here. We didn't scare you all away. Damn. We're used to scaring people away, you see. This is unusual. Means I have to actually do the second talk. Oh, good. What a shame. It's all failing. Automation. Okay, I'm not really going to do it like that. Automation. So, obviously, the joys of using the command line is that once you start using the command line, you start realizing that you can script stuff. That's not where my water is. And if you start scripting stuff, you can start automating stuff. And then you don't need to do anything. And you can live on a desert island and your sites will look after themselves. It's the theory. I'm going to tell you now it's not going to work, but it's a lovely theory. But because WP-CLI outputs stuff to the command line, we can use any scripting that we would normally use on the command line and interact with WP-CLI. So has anybody here ever heard of the word bash scripts? Yeah? Bash is the shell. In fact, just to be confusing, I've done all my slides not using bash, but using ZSH. But same principle, it's a shell, the thing that I'm logging into. And bash is a very basic scripting language, which basically takes whatever inputs you're given, and you can do things like simple for loops and pass variables to it. But you can also do scripting in anything. You can write scripts to run on the command line using PHP. In fact, WP-CLI is written in PHP. Someone asked me earlier, because one thing we somehow managed to drift over is actually installing WP-CLI. It's very simple. You curl the FAR file. Now, a FAR file, that's P-H-A-R, is a PHP archive file. It's almost like they went, oh, look at Java. They've got jar files. We'll do the same. And once you've got the FAR file on, you can just run it by going php wp-cli.far and then give it the command that you're going to use, so plugin list. And you can run PHP that way. So that's if you get an SSH access and you suddenly find yourself on a server and it doesn't have WP-CLI installed. Terrible. That's how you can get it up and running in seconds. You could then, if you want to, you can move it to your user bin libbin even. And if you use chmod +x to allow execution, you can then run it using WP. But once we got that in place, a few things to worry about with automation. By default, every time I've been running these commands, and I've been making it look really simple by not doing anything live, if I go in here, and we'll just do pwd, which is what Keith showed before, we can see I'm in my Vagrant folder, and if I do WP plugin list, ignore the error at the top, it's because I'm not connected to the internet, and we can see that I've got a plugin appearing here. If I actually do we can see that this is my folder with all my stuff in it. And more importantly, you notice that there's a WP folder there. That's actually where WordPress is really hiding. Because WP-CLI works exactly the same way as WordPress, it assumes that because it's in this folder, it can see one folder below it, can see that there's a WP config file there, so it assumes that this is its parent folder. So you can go up one level higher than where it normally would be. Cool. Hopefully that made vague sense. If I do cd slash, so pwd, it's just going to return back. I'm in my root directory. There is definitely no WordPress there. All it looks very confusing. If we then do WP plugin list, and I do that, it's going, huh? There's no WordPress here. Now, when you run and execute any scripts, the script isn't going to know which directory WordPress is in. It's going to try and, if you run the command, it will, depending on how the script is set up, it will either run in the folder that the script's in or run from root, i.e. back as far as it can go. So the way to get around this is, it says in the error message, we can actually pass it a path equals vagrant slash WP. Note that in this example, I had to add that WP where I didn't previously. That's because I have to explicitly say I am giving it the path to the WordPress location. No going around, no going and finding and hiding things. Off we go. There we go, it comes back in there. If you're doing any form of automation or scripting, always add that path in there. Otherwise, you are going to find relativeness an absolute pain in the bum. See, I didn't swear, it's good. Another thing that you might find useful is if we go and show you that, this table, it's lovely. It gives me lots of beautiful information that I, as a human being, can understand. If I'm writing a script that needs to pass this information and do stuff with it, not so good. I'm actually piping this through and trying to use the grep commands and similar to get information out of this is going to be a bit of a nightmare. So instead, -- format equals JSON. I know how to use JSON. I can pass that fairly easily. So instead of returning me a table, it's returning me a JSON format. You can also use CSV, and there's a couple of others. You can also extend this, so you can add your own formats if you have a particular need for something truly unique and wonderful. Very easy, and it passes it out into the string. Next thing to know is that we can pass in arbitrary files of our choosing. So WP eval -file, and then pass it the file. It's best if this is a PHP file, otherwise this doesn't go quite as well as you'd think it should do. Test.php, in this case, all that PHP file is doing is echoing hello. But I can run any WP commands I want in there because this file is being loaded after WordPress is loaded, and it's being loaded into the WordPress user space. So it knows all the WordPress functions that it can normally get access to. It's the equivalent of you going into your theme and opening up the index.php file or the functions.php file and writing stuff directly into it. The difference is this is nicely isolated. So if you've got a one-off thing you want to do, you're writing a script that you're going to do a report or something out of there, you can write your code into a nice test file somewhere and just run this one-off. If you don't, it's dirty, is a nice way of describing this, but you'll find you use this an awful lot. You can use WP eval space, open up and use double quotes to create a string, and start writing arbitrary PHP. Don't do that. I've done it. I never managed to do it right the first time, and normally I cause chaos on the way. There is a better way of doing it. WP shell. This is an interactive shell for your WordPress site. I'm saying echo hello, it returns me hello. If I go and ask it for a site URL, I can get the site URL back. I can write any PHP code I like, and it will execute it against your WordPress site. If I decide I want to start writing SQL queries that dump all the database tables, I have just dumped all the database tables. That's not necessarily a good thing to do. But where might you use this? I actually know people who write themes using WP Shell because they're mental. But they did it, and I watched someone do a live demo of a REST API theme. It was amazing until the point that I realized how stupid it was. What I use it for pretty much every day, you will find me at some point during the day opening up WP Shell and doing something along the lines of setting a HTTP host equals the name of the website, WP_mail, open brackets, the email address, the subject, and a message, then hit enter. Why am I doing this? I want to check that WP Mail is sending a mail, and I want to see the actual message coming back. So when someone sends us a support ticket in and says, my contact form isn't sending email, it's your server, I can go, nope, it's not. I'm using the WP Mail command itself, so I don't need to worry about writing a script to do this. It's a two-liner, I can just paste in there, I get the information back. WP Shell is really useful for that sort of really dirty sort of level of a quick, I just need to test this bump. Just be very careful with it. It really is the power up. If you know a little bit of PHP, you can do a hell of a lot of harm. Which is pretty much, if you know a little bit of PHP, you can do a hell of a lot of harm generally. In a very similar manner, if you used to WP-CLI, drops you straight into your MySQL client. Getting into MySQL is not like the most amazing thing ever that's going to occur to you, but it means you don't need to worry about database credentials or anything like that. In fact, the WDB, there's quite a few little things on there. WDB tables, for example, will list out all your tables. Very handy for working out what the prefix is if you don't want to bother to look in the config file. You can also do things like DB query and run any query you like on there. So you just put your query string in. That is running a genuine query. So again, if you put drop or similar, it will execute it. It is running as the WordPress user credentials that you've gotten out of the config file. So it can only do the permissions that you could have done normally. Again, it's designed just to make your life a little easier. One thing that everybody could be running today, go and just type WP-DB optimize. And if the table, it will basically go through all your database and it will optimize each table. If it can't actually support optimization, it will recreate and try and clear out all the junk. It's a fantastic, easy way to, if you're getting performance issues, a combination of WP transits and removing all the transits that you've got lying around, and WP-DB optimize does wonders for a site that's just feeling sluggish. You can't quite work out what's going on, where it's having holdups, particularly in the admin area. Run this command and you will find that mysteriously your sites get a lot faster. We never used to, but we've started optimizing the database and clearing out transit as part of our standard migration. And in some cases, we are finding it's taking hours, but at the end of it makes a massive difference. I'm shooting through these, but if you are, how many people here are developers still? There's quite a few of you. If you want to be, how many of you write plugins? You write the same crap out day in, day out for the basic plugin. WP scaffold plugin, give it a name. Creates a folder with folder structure, plugin, creates some basic plugin files for you. Creates a second folder with tests. Yeah, so you can run PHP unit tests alongside it. I know, sorry. You can delete that folder, it's fine. But you could run tests against it. Similarly, everybody here knows you should probably use a child theme. If you've got unless you've designed the theme yourselves, if you've bought a premium theme, or you've got a theme from WordPress.org and you want to make modifications, you don't do it in the parent, you do it in the child. But building a child theme, that's complicated, right? It takes at least 20 seconds. That's how complicated it is. Thankfully, we can stop this. WP scaffold child -theme, give it a name, your new and what the parent theme is, and wow, we've got a theme that's already not only switched over, it's activated for you. Instant child theme creation. No hassles attached to it. There are a couple of other scaffolding ones in there. There's scaffolding for packages and a few other bits in there. And scaffolding for just creating underscore themes. So it is available in there. You can also expand this out. So For my own stuff, I actually have written my own scaffolding bits and pieces for scaffolding plugins in the way that I like to write plugins, rather than using the default setting. Just add some extra bits like an autoloader and bits in there. How many of you know how the WordPress crons actually work? You poor soul. Yes. So most people probably think, because it says the word cron, it uses, I don't know, cron jobs, and you'd be laughably wrong. The WordPress uses something called a pseudo cron, which basically means it will run an AJAX request in the background when a user visits the site and does something of significance that they think will take long enough that the cron jobs might run. Brilliant, and totally flawed in every respect. What normally happens is admin users, when they first log in, it takes forever because it's actually running all the crons it supposedly ran ages ago. So whenever you get something that says it's running an hourly cron job, and if you don't have a high traffic site and you're not getting comments and you're not getting actions occurring, what actually happened was all those hourly cron jobs were ran the next time you log in. But mysteriously, when you go and look at your scheduled crons, they all ran because you've just been waiting for them to run through. You can disable WordPress cron and tell it to use, you can then set up a real cron tab and say, hey, use this cron tab and pass over the command. And then that runs, just executes the PHP, or you use wget to call the URL. Lots of people recommend doing that. It's one way of doing it. Actually, the way I'd recommend is using WP-CLI, which allows you to not only run crons, you can run them individually and manually, but you can also see the list of what crons are there. And you can set this up on a cron job to then process any WP cron event that needs to run that's due now to be processed through. You can get really clever with this. I mean, this is the point. We can start scripting this. So we can actually say, get a list of the crons that are due now, and then run them as separate processes so they don't hold each other up. This speeds up websites, especially websites that have got things like backup plugins are notorious for this, where they will just run and then they will overrun their schedule so that they'll add the next one saying that they haven't completed the backup. And what you actually go in, when you start looking at the backup schedule, you'll see this list of 8,000 crons that need to be run right now, and it's the same thing over and over and over and over again because it never quite completed its way through. If you do come across this problem, WP cron event delete, and then you specify that the event will delete it as well. So it's a really handy place to be. You can see it at my very boring schedule list there. So if we just go through, something that Keith was going to mention and he forgot is that for those of you who do struggle from muscle memory and can't actually remember commands off the top of your head, I know we make it look seamless. We just type things and it just magically happens. But I'm going to tell you into a secret. If that WP, I did it without actually doing anything. I'm just hitting tab, and if we go in here and I just list it, see, we'll see that there's only two possibilities of what it could be, WP and WP-config.php. As that's a file, if I'm changing directories into the WP folder, if I hit tab, it will just automatically fill out that endpoint. Bash completion is basically the saving grace of anybody over the age of 12. As your memory starts to go, you're relying more on tabbing. And if most setups will allow you, if you tab twice, it will give you some options for what you're trying to do. And depending on how some things are set up, if you tab it 3 times, it will actually just guess for you based on what it assumed you tried to do last time. So don't be put off by this idea that you don't have the memory for using the command line. And always remember that you can actually just go to a browser and type these things in. So you don't need to be remembering everything off the top of your head. So I've forgotten what I was doing now. That's very confusing. Let's have a look at this site. So we'll just go WP plugin list. It's a little slow because it's trying to connect to the WordPress or theme list. Okay, so if we do WP scaffold child theme test parent theme equals whoops. I meant to do that, you know. There we go. If we other things just to help you around the command line. If you use the up arrow key, it will go back up through your bash history. I find myself day in, day out going up, 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 down, up, down, up, down. A combination of RM minus RF and nano, whatever I'm doing, tends to happen quite a lot as I'm removing the file, then just reapplying it. We can now see that that test is actually there. I can just go WP theme activate test. Cool. And if I go back, we'll see it there again. So if we just go, I'm just going to show how quickly you get used to the idea of doing stuff. Whoops. Live demos, they're great. It's really intuitive just to be able to just know. Anytime you make an error, you're just going to find out and it's just going to tell you.
So you have to put the minus deactivate because that's what the...
I had to deactivate it first. Yeah, if I'd left out the hyphen deactivate, it would have just come back with an error saying, this is still active. Are you sure you want to be doing such insane things like just randomly removing crap off the internet? Unfortunately, I'm just not on the internet, but if I'd done WP plugin, in fact, that affiliate WP install came from GitHub, not the WordPress.org repository. If I wanted to install it, all I had to do was WP plugin install, the name of the plugin. I can also give it a URL. So I can get, and that URL can be anywhere that's a zip file. It does at least check that it's a zip file and will check that something inside of it looks like a PHP file before it tries to do the rest of it. And as an added bonus, if you're getting stuff from GitHub, you might notice that when you normally download stuff from GitHub and you're downloading a zip from a version, it will normally come as the master with hyphen master in it and have the trunk and the branch information. WP-CLI is smart enough to know that it's come from GitHub, recognizes the format and will strip that out so you end up with a nice safe affiliate name. That's why that slug looks slightly different and is actually got capitalized in there because it's been done on the fly all the way through. Wander our way back.
Tim,
Yeah.
can you just move the bottom of your terminal up about 4 lines? Because the front row of heads is obscuring all the terminal. That's really cool.
I've made it nice and big. This is not my normal typing mode. It's very difficult. Well, now I've done that, I'm just going to go back into here.
I tried.
You did. So, obviously, if it's WP-CLI, and you can write commands, you can do commands, you can extend it. We can perch this stuff in, but we can sort of start playing with it ourselves. if we've got a plugin and I need to run that background report? Okay, I wrote that report once. Cool, but I need to run that monthly. I could just put that into a file, or I could actually start extending this out. One way to do this is I could create packages, and there are plenty of packages out there. People are doing this already. I could do WP package install and then a package. In this example, I'm installing the RESTful package up there. And this is actually, instead of installing a plugin on your WordPress site, this is installing a package for WP-CLI. So it's extensions and plugins specifically for WP-CLI, and there are loads of them. If you want to look for them, you can do WP package search and WP package browse, and it will bring them back. To be honest, the interface, doing this through the interface on WP-CLI is a bit of a pain. However, if you go on to the WP-CLI.org website, you can see all the common packages that are available. There are some really good ones on there. There's Profile and Doctor are two that I really like. They give you some performance information. Lots of basic little information in there. You can also do WP package uninstall. Just bear in mind when you're installing and uninstalling packages, you are doing this as your current user for all the installs of whenever you might be interacting with WP-CLI. However, packages can be a bit of a pain, so why not just write our own? We can either extend a plugin or we can write a package directly out. And to do this, we create a file and we tell it to, because we're in the modern world, we get to use namespaces. So you specify that what namespace you're using. Check that this file is not being called unless it's WP_CLI's defined. Give it a class, and basically you just create a class with your commands in it, and you're extending the WP-CLI command. And then inside your class, you can write something like this. So this is just a function. This is a live function that genuinely comes from our stuff. In fact, if you are doing pushes to and from our staging site system, or if you're using our Git implementation and you want to trigger actions inside WordPress, you basically call this function, or rather you call the do action, and this function we run every time we do an update to staging for you. But it's good as just a basic example. Every function that has arguments and associated arguments, the associated arguments are those hyphen bits, and the arguments are the things that were the main commands we came across. So we can see here, this is going to be calling WP hosting trigger. So this is the function trigger, and it accepts and passes through the arguments. And that is as simple as it gets. I'll show you this. I'm going to. Oops. You're all seeing some secret. Yeah, this won't pass the lint test. This is semi-dirty stuff. Let's give you an example. So if we go right at the top, this is our internal command structure. This is for a bunch of stuff that we use. We've got at the top the utils, the defines. They've got the class. Blah blah blah. We'll skip the really scary looking modules and go to something simple. This is our password. One of our password checking tools. It checks for weak passwords, so you can actually run WP int pass check, and it will go and check everybody's user passwords to see if they're in the top 100,000 passwords, and break them if they do. But the big point that I was going to put in there is that you've got to run the actual commands. All you need to do is have a public function, and the minimum it needs is a synopsis of saying what it's going to be. If you don't have that synopsis, it will take the function name and try and pass it through. So if you've got anything inside your command class, has to be, if it's public, it can be used. Anything that's private or protected, it won't be using. I always use a synopsis, which is basically giving it a name to the trigger. Other things that are quite useful to know is this before WP load. If you run this, it means the command will be actually triggered before WordPress gets loaded. This is both useful and pointless. It is useful in that there's often sometimes where you might want a function that you're just including in with a bunch of other stuff. It is useless because if WordPress hasn't loaded, it can't do anything with WordPress. For something called WP-CLI, this has a flaw. But actually, in this example, we wanted for people to be able to run their own PHP 7 compatibility checks. They already knew these tools existed. We just built this straight in. It doesn't need to rely on running anything. It can just run the before WP load in there. Finally, right at the end, how you add the actual commands is WP-CLI add, and int would be your main command, and then your TFSP int command down there. And these can be, this could be a package. You can just simply require this if you've got a if WP-CLI sees WP-CLI.yaml, it's a then it will open up those config files and it will take any data from there. So you can actually put in your YAML file require and give it a path to any commands, and it will load those commands in as well and run them and execute them. So if you're a plugin developer, you can add it as an action, saying, hey, this is an action, I have these commands here. Those commands have to be in a separate file. So they need to be separated away. So if you're going to extend it out, you've got a choice. You can either just create files and require them in YAML. Very easy for doing internal stuff. Terrible if you're going to distribute. If you're going to distribute something and it's purely going to be WP-CLI based, you can do it as a package. If you're going to be distributing something that you would use with a plugin, you can bundle it with the plugin and just let the plugin add commands. And plenty of plugins do add commands. So things like WooCommerce add commands, caching plugins add a whole range. Pretty much any of the big major plugins that you're using, chances are they've got WP-CLI specific commands. And there's a few times where they're really, really useful. How many people here use EWWWW, whatever it is, image optimizer? Ooh, yep. And you've sat on the interface and you press the button and it chugs along for hours and hours and hours and hours. It's got a lovely WP-CLI command that does exactly the same thing without the chugging interface and takes about 1/8 of the time. But also, you can put this into a screen process and wander off without any worries. If you are a plugin developer, for a long time, I've been advocating that you write WP-CLI commands before you write an actual admin interface. Because chances are, it's the most logical layer for you to be interacting with anyway. As a developer, you probably know what function. It will also simplify your user interface. If you cannot use your plugin except through WP-CLI, then once you've got it, then you know it's going to have functionality that's dead simple to be able to implement in an admin interface. If you start needing weird sliders and things, your accessibility is already heading downwards and your complexity of your plugin is already going up. So start off by developing any inputs you're doing with WP-CLI. You happen to provide a nice layer for people like me, so it's a positive thing, but also it will make hopefully your plugin development easier. Finally, we can get a bit more clever. One of the nice things I mentioned this YAML file, is that I can specify locations in my YAML file of where I want things to happen. So I can say, give it an alias at dev and say the alias is the SSH vagrant box. And then I can have, and then I can run WP at dev plugin list. I can run this from my local machine and it will SSH into my vagrant box and run that command plugin list. I can run also at both and give it a list. I can just list as many SSH commands as I like, and then I can SSH sessions as I like, and then I can do WP at both, and it will go to both in parallel. If you are using tmux, pshell, something like that, you can actually, as long as you're specifying your SSH connection over those, it will do it in parallel, but otherwise it will be one after the other after the other after the other. It's really, really nice. Suddenly, I have one interface. My basic, I can have just one file on my machine, and I can do all my WP-CLI without actually going onto the servers themselves. Obviously, they're doing the trips. You can also specify other protocols alongside. You don't have to use SSH, as long as you've got a mechanism for getting onto the server. So if you've got a console access, for example, you could pass it through. There are other weirder, more wild routes that you could take. It really does give you a bit more of a fun place to be. This stuff came out of a project that was I've referenced a couple of times through, which was the RESTful project. There was a great idea that was with the WordPress REST API. Well, that opens up all these wonderful possibilities. And some insane person went, I know, we can start making the RESTful API calls on the command line, which sounds brilliant when you think about it, because it means you could connect to any server without having any access to SSH and being able to make these calls. Only the REST API was never really designed to provide a complete replication of the WP Admin area, and it doesn't really handle things like, managing objects or any of the commands that we're really happy to use. But you can still interact with any website using WP-CLI and RESTful. Your access is limited, but you can get things like lists of users, etc., etc. Again, you specify an alias, but you specify the JSON endpoint in here, and then you make those requests with a very limited amount of access. Not something I'd recommend doing. To be honest, it is so frustrating. I've got a couple of sites set up like that, and I'll go and type a command, and then I'll remember that I don't actually have that level of access. It is a tad frustrating. For those of you who might be thinking, okay, I'm still not convinced it's fast, I'm still not convinced it's going to be my future, we promised to change your world, and there's several people here who I don't think we've changed your world. It's okay, but there are a few things to think about. If you care about security, WP-CLI is an amazing tool for doing auditing, for understanding what's going on, for going through your posts, filtering them very quickly, for spotting issues with users. If you care about performance and making things go faster, it's a very simple way, doing things like database optimizing in there. If you care about being able to always access your site quickly and easily, this is the way to do it. If you're just fed up of using the admin area, and that's me, I don't like the WordPress admin area. Someone does, it keeps being voted a really good thing. But I don't like the admin area, and I don't like the fact that plugins manipulate it. I don't like things changing stuff. I find actually compiling quick and easy, to the point that I will when I write a blog post, I'll write a blog post, and then I use WP post insert to insert it into my site. And then I've got a little plugin that will then return me the preview link so I can click on it. So I never actually have to even go into my admin area, and I can just change the status from draft to published. I've realized at this point how much I'm probably not actually a WordPress person anymore. But it does provide me with a completely different view. If you're a developer, remember there's people like me. I don't like going in the admin interface. If you're if you're putting things in the options table, make it easy for me to modify and manipulate them via WP-CLI. If you're a theme designer, I hate you anyway, so sorry. But please, please, please know that this thing exists, and it does mean that your random theme options in a weird table somewhere are going to cause me pain and hell. What you can't get with the WP-CLI that you can, obviously, with the admin interface is the customizer. That would be quite fun, actually. I wonder if someone's going to do a project where they can do a live preview in CLI with ASCII art of your site. That would be quite cool. Other things we haven't mentioned at all is it's fully compatible with multi-site for you poor souls who use multi-site. You specify when you want to deal with a different site, you specify -- site and give it the site URL, and then it will work for that specific version of multi-site. There are so many things we can show off and do. I'm going to tell you a couple of cautionary tales and a couple of things that you do need to be aware of. So sudo su means I am now technically a root user. And if I was to do WP plugin list, quite rightly, if I do WP plugin list, it comes and gives me this massive thing that says, yikes, it looks like you're running this as root. Yes, don't do this as root. The fact that someone has bothered to make an error message that is almost the size of a standard WordPress error message in an admin interface should be a hint not to run this as root. If I was to run it as root, I could do this and just allow root, and it will come back in a second and do it. But why do I not want to run this as root? I'm now going to tell you the cautionary tale of genuinely happened to us, and how I found something that was an incredibly fun thing to be hacked. I came across a site that was misbehaving a while ago when we were first doing our beta, and we ran some WP-CLI commands as root. Before the WordPress user was created, we set them up, and what we didn't realize is when we first set up, we were running the cron jobs that ran WP-CLI. So we got rid of our sudo cron, we set up a hard cron, and we were running those cron jobs as the root user. Which meant PHP was being executed as the root user when we were running the crons. And someone got hacked. That's not in itself too much of a problem. What was interesting is it got hacked, and the hack, when it ran, tried to spin up a PHP server. So most people possibly don't know that PHP has its own inbuilt web server, that you can specify a port to it, and it will just go and spin off its own HTTP server and start serving files randomly on that port. This isn't really an issue unless you happen to be the root user and can bust through the firewall to open the port and start serving random spam. So we found this, so looking through, trying to desperately to work out how on earth something had got enough privileges to bust through about 12 layers of our security and open a port to start serving malicious spam. It turned out something as very simple as we were running this cron. It happened to be being executed as root, which happened to have just enough permissions to open up the server and run through. Not our finest moments. Fixed very quickly. Strangely enough, there was quite a lot of, under no circumstances does anybody run any code as root ever again bits through. Never, ever, ever use allow root. You do not know what code's running in there. Even if you think you're doing -- skip plugins, skip themes, you don't know if the main site was hacked. You don't know what underlying stuff was in there. You don't know if you've got a random require file in there. You just don't know, so don't run it as root. The second one, while running things, big jobs, if you are running big jobs and you're doing it, you have PHP running as your user, just bear in mind that your php.ini settings will take effect, and these might be different than your web servers. So normally the CLI version normally doesn't have any timeouts on it, and it doesn't have any memory limits. This means whereas your PHP web server would fall over and go, hang on a minute, you're trying to load 128 meg of random big table into RAM. Don't do that, and it would fall over and fail. Through WP-CLI, it will quite happily go on. That means if you've got an infinite loop, you have an infinite loop, and you'll start gobbling up more and more and more memory till it falls over. You can set, normally a PHP, most versions of PHP, you can set a PHP ini file in your root directory to just use those settings. It's sometimes very useful to have the ability to just run a script infinitely and use up as much resources as you like, but it's often the thing, again, it's when you forget to put skip plugins and skip themes in there. I know, it was that impressive. Skip plugins and skip themes in there, and it's the plugin that's chewing it along and padding the details across. I think we are more or less at the end, but I would, at this point, challenge anybody to ask Keith a bunch of questions on WP-CLI, because as the expert that he is. We're apparently WordPress hosting experts and WP-CLI experts. Who knew? But yeah, seriously, does people have any questions? And we'll both try to answer them as best we can. Yes?
Just relevant to what you said about never run it as root.
Never run it as root.
It's interesting then that option sort of has existed. Was there ever a historical reason for it being there that some people like? Is that why it's still there? Or?
Well, there are systems where there is actually only a root user,
Okay.
and there is no choice.
Okay.
They're very badly designed systems, but they exist. Yeah, and it's actually probably started off with there was no warning at all. Someone did something really stupid, and now there's a warning. The warning is getting bigger, I think. I'm pretty sure there's an extra line's got added since, and on our hosting it's got an extra couple of lines which involve me swearing. But yeah, just don't run its root. Anybody else got any questions?
Cool question. Did you cover WP help and the -- prompt option? Because they're really helpful if you're a beginner.
I didn't, on the grounds I don't actually find them that helpful.
If you're a beginner and you don't know the command.
I was going to say, so WP help will gives you a list of commands and bits and pieces attached to them. The thing is, I actually find that the interface, while it mimics man pages, which is what Keith was talking about earlier, I actually find them a bit hard to read and manage on the command line. So what I'd suggest is actually going to WPCLI.org and the commands button, which is a quick link. You can see them all there. It's one of those very few times where actually I'm not really keen on seeing them in there. But Bash auto-completion is your saving grace. Start typing things out, hitting the tab key will complete it along. But yeah, or WP help. And there's also going to be there's a new command coming in soon that will give you interactive help, which looks very cool, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. Yes.
I've got another question, but if anyone else has a question.
No, well, your hand is in the air, and you've.
It was earlier on when you said about being able to execute WP remotely, and then you can, if you've got very limited access, so you can install it as a file and then run it via PHP command and so on. I suddenly thought, with a kind of a malicious person, is that is WP-CLI really roundabout way to do hacking websites? Are there far more effective ways?
Yeah, you could just upload a PHP file with gives you a shell access or runs the same thing.
So in other words, the input, it's not really presenting a significant.
No, everything you can do in WP-CLI you can do using PHP. It is just written in PHP. It is just a nice, handy way of doing it. Having WP-CLI on your site has, as far as I know, no proven security risks other than the fact that you have a WordPress website. Anyone else? It doesn't just have to be about WP-CLI. It can be generally command stuff. Please use it. How many people here, in fact? Oh, sorry, Joe.
I was going to ask you, just sort of quickly mentioned that you could create a post using this.
Yes.
So can you create, like a full post? How would you insert media, or can it not do that?
Oh, that's more fun. That gets complicated. But yeah, WPost insert.
I'm just thinking of a number of times we're just setting up a lot of dummy pages, posts.
Oh, do you know what I really should do? It's not be in as a root user. Is it posts? Yeah, I did mean post. Oh no, it's because it's create, that's why. Oops, it is right. I only need those two. Oh, come off it.
Sorry.
It's all right. If I spelt something wrong. Oh. Fuck off.
Well, we get the idea. We can always,
Yeah, I was going to say.
we can always, you know, RTFM, can't we?
Yes, that's. Dun 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 dun. So you can either pass in a bunch of files, or you can do fields, which, and I needed to put in both content, title, and post and excerpt, which I'm pretty sure it should be post underscore score, which is where it was going wrong. But yeah. As for adding media, you can do it as associated chains. So you add the fields and you can do a subquery which will pass through extra attachments. It's a real pain to do that way. So yeah, that's probably not a good example of where you're doing it through. In fact, if we just go back into help. So I really haven't actually shown all the commands. Just give you an idea of how many commands there are. Kismet's being put in because of it's being on Kismet's installed. Your cache is for flushing and doing things with the object cache. Capabilities is adding and modifying user capabilities. It's not specifically modifying roles, that's adding it to an individual and modifying those bits. Checksums being is for doing core verification, and we'll eventually do plugin stuff in there. CLI, we'll skip comments, core, blah, 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 cron. Some other interesting ones, media, and so the media commands what you would use to add an attachment in there. One of the nice things about media is you can also regenerate thumbnails and stuff from there, which is quite handy. If you've suddenly if you change themes, you can go into WP Media and regenerate all the thumbnails. So if the theme's got new image sizes, it will do that on the fly. Saves you going through. The rest, pardon?
Sorry, just noticed menus because I was thinking, oh,
Yep.
that would be good.
You can edit menus, change menus, and modify them. It's a bit of a pig. The server actually launches the internal PHP server. Please don't do that. No one should use the internal PHP server for anything other than testing stuff. The WPC stuff for WooCommerce. Super Admin lets you do multi-site stuff in there. You can modify some. I actually think you probably could make a customizer. We could probably make an ASCII-based customizer. That might be quite a cool and entertaining thing to do. But there's plenty of stuff in there. There was someone else about to ask a question. I've forgotten what it was. No? Anybody? Nope. Going once? Going twice? Ask Keith something really complicated. No, he's not. He's behind you. He's not very good at hiding. Go on. Oh, can I do one plug for the company? Otherwise, my boss will ask me what did we do for the last 2 days jolly. If you are interested in our hosting, we do manage WordPress hosting. If you use the coupon code WP Road Trip, you'll get a month's free hosting, absolutely free. You don't need to worry about putting credit cards or anything in. You can come and test it. We do free migrations, so you could actually just pick any old site that you like that you've got. You click on our migration form, fill in the details. We'll migrate it for you, so you don't have to do anything. You can see if you like it. If you do like it, you can obviously carry on. If not, no harm, no foul. Thank you very much.